is essential to our lives. Without a dream, like your life or my life, it can be really rudderless, like a boat that just gets sort of blown around by wind and waves. It's unable to set a direction. Well, without a dream, we get swallowed by the immediate. Right now, we just don't have much margin for dreaming because we're just so swamped with everything that quote unquote needs to be done right now.
You're listening to the Ferment podcast, conversations about worship and transformation. Today's episode begins our 4-part series on dreaming with our host, Adam Russell.
Hi everyone, this is Melissa Keller, Events Director for Vineyard Worship. I wanted to take a minute to invite you to our upcoming Worship Leaders Retreat in Cannon Beach, Oregon, February 19th through the 22nd. This retreat is for anyone who is involved in worship ministry. Join us for a time of rest and encouragement with extended times of worship and personal ministry on the beautiful Oregon coast. If you've never been to one of our retreats, use the promo code Ferment and get 30% off your registration. For more information, visit our website at vineyardworship.com/events. Hope to see you there.
What up, everybody? My name is Adam Russell, and you are listening to the Ferment podcast. And I just want to say that today's edition of the podcast is a little bit different than the other stuff we've been doing here on the Ferment, and that's because this is a special edition. Somebody say special edition. That's right. You're in your car and you're talking with me. All right. Hey, this is what we're doing. This is going to be a 4-part series on dreaming. This is something that's been stirring in me, and if you know me at all, you know part of my, I guess you could say, life message is it's in the realm of dreaming, inspiring people to dream, hopefully giving people the feeling that they can dream. And I guess that's what I want to talk about here up front. I'm not just talking about like falling asleep and having a dream in the middle of the night. Instead, what I mean is having some sort of like vision for your life, you know? I guess one way we could say this would be letting a certain part of your brain or heart sleep so that another part could wake up and speak its voice. In fact, I think that's something that sort of happens to us when we go to sleep at night. It's like that part of our conscious mind that is sort of like running everything day to day, and that part of our heart that is sort of leading and is really responsible and all those sorts of things. It's funny, it goes to sleep, and then all of a sudden we become vulnerable to these other parts of our consciousness and these other parts of our heart. I would even say these other parts of God. Like, this is one of the reasons that God speaks to us in the middle of the night, right? Because it's when we're most vulnerable to Him. Some of us have our defenses so up during the day that God has to speak to us in dreams in the middle of the night. And so I guess I could say here on the front end that being a dreamer, in at least the sense that we're going to explore it for the next few weeks, it means letting a certain part of who you are sleep, or letting a certain part of who you are rest, so this other part could wake up and speak to us. Letting that ultra responsible part of you just take a break. That's what I mean, you know? So that this other part of you could just have access to your imagination. And so that's what I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you about dreaming. I guess the first thing I want to say in this episode, or maybe it's the second thing I want to say. The second thing maybe I want to say here is that dreaming is essential to our lives. Dreaming is essential to our lives. Without a dream, like your life or my life, it can be really rudderless, like a boat that just gets sort of blown around by wind and waves. It's unable to set a direction, you know? Well, without a dream, we get swallowed by the immediate. And some of you know what I'm talking about here. Right now, we just don't have much margin for dreaming because we're just so swamped with everything that quote unquote needs to be done right now. But giving ourselves permission to dream allows us to take space and maybe set some important things aside so we can attend to something that's more important. And then finally, without a dream, we become vulnerable to outside influences that may not have our best futures in mind. I guess what I mean by that is, like, if you don't have a dream for your life, or if there's if there's not a dream that's sort of taking up some of that creative imagination in your life, then we become vulnerable to maybe someone else's dream, or maybe a company's dream, or just some outside influences. And you know what? Those other things could be very good. I'm not even saying they're bad. I'm just saying that there might be something in you that if you're not seeing it, if you're not attending to it, it can lie dormant. And in that dormant place, all of a sudden, we're just sort of like rudderless. Again, like I said a few moments ago, we're just rudderless to, gosh, this other force or this other influence that's out there, and it might not allow us to reach our best future, you know? Okay, here's what I want to do next. I want to really quickly just talk to us about some things that maybe keep us from dreaming. Maybe a few things here that just keep us from being able to enter in. The first thing I want to say is some of us just don't feel like we're allowed. And I know that sounds really weird, but I actually encounter this all the time. I've been in ministry at the church here for like 20 years, and this is one of the most common things that I've noticed in people who don't have a dream for their life is they somehow feel disempowered, or they feel like they're not allowed. Sometimes we're so overwhelmed with, I guess you could say, false humility, that we just feel disallowed from imagining our own personal flourishing or our own personal desires. You know, we just feel like, well, that's not the spiritual thing to do. We feel like that's not really the humble goal of the spiritual life or the Christian life. And so we just feel disallowed. Or you know, even more specifically, we feel like, you know, maybe leaning into that is not what God wants. And maybe we'll come back to that later in this episode or another one. But generally speaking, some of us just don't feel allowed. The second thing that keeps us from dreaming, that'd be past disappointment. And my goodness, this is a big one. You know, if you're going to be a dreamer, you're also going to have to work through past disappointment. And why is that? Well, because life is really complicated. Newsflash, life is complicated. Sometimes things don't work out, or sometimes we started on something and the truth is we just weren't ready. Like maybe the dream was real and maybe it was good and maybe it was right. Maybe it was even a God dream. Maybe it was a part of our divine destiny, but we just weren't ready. Like, you know, and not being ready can mean a lot of things, you know, just maybe we weren't emotionally ready to handle it, or maybe we didn't have the expertise we needed to move into that season. And so we just experienced some failure. Well, we sometimes are just going to have to be people who accept the fact that life is really complicated and there might be some failure there or some disappointment. But if we don't have healthy ways of managing disappointment and failure, it will choke out our ability to dream. It can become a choking narrative, you know. And some of us who are listening to me right now, you know exactly what I'm talking about. All right, the third thing that keeps us from dreaming, and I've already sort of mentioned this, but I want to highlight it again, is something I would call immediate life pressure. And just read for that, no margins. We just get so swamped by getting by, we don't have margin for dreaming. Or we're so overwhelmed with making rent and managing the house, we don't have the emotional space to consider life in a different way. I'll just tell you one really quick story here. When my fourth born came into the world, my little Rowan, some of you guys know him from my wife's Facebook stories. He's the most infamous Russell, by the way. When Rowan was first born, I took 2 weeks off of work, and I'd never done that before. Actually, I had done that one time before. Heather and I went to Hawaii, but like, I'm sort of a worker bee. I get weird if I'm staying home. I don't do good not having like my routine, and I don't do good without having something to do. But when Rowan was born, I just felt compelled to stay home for 2 weeks. And so I didn't do anything. I didn't go to the church. I didn't work on stuff. I didn't return emails. I was just home with my new little son, and he was born in May and the weather was great. So I just remember when he was born, I sat on the front porch and basically I just held him for 2 weeks. I just sat on the front porch with the dog at my feet and Rowan in my arms, and I wasn't trying to do anything. I wasn't trying to change my life. I wasn't trying to do any of those things. I was just enjoying the new space, you know. I was enjoying the new rhythm, or the lack of rhythm, I guess you could say. And as a part of that, I started having ideas. Now, what's funny is I'm an idea person, but I can tell you, I was in a season leading up to that moment where I wasn't having many new ideas anymore. And after about a week of sitting on the porch with Rowan, all of a sudden I started having ideas. And in the course of 2 weeks of being home and kind of experiencing a new rhythm and enjoying new margin, I had 4 business ideas that I'd never thought of before. And again, I'm a pastor. I'm not a business person per se. My wife and I, we own a couple businesses, but it's not the main thing we do. But I do enjoy thinking about those things. Anyway, I had 4 business ideas. 3 of them were like, meh. They weren't that great after I dug into them a little bit, but one of them was kind of cool. And I ended up working on it, and it's become something that's, kind of off on the side and will one day hopefully be a real blessing to our family. Okay, the only reason I'm telling you that story is you need margins, and immediate life pressures can really, oh my gosh, they can rob from us. Okay, so how do we start? I think the most important thing for those of us who are wanting to lean into being a dreamer, I think the most important thing for those of us who are hoping to live out some sort of a passion, or live out life with a conviction and with a purpose, I think we have to wake up to the fact that God is a dreamer. And maybe you've considered that, or maybe you haven't, but I think this is absolutely foundational. If you read Genesis, one of the things you see in the first 3 verses is that God is creating stuff, and he's doing it with words. So the famous Genesis expression right there at the beginning. God says, "Let there be light." So God creates the worlds with words. But it occurred to me several years ago that there's a thing that's more foundational than the words. And the thing that's more foundational than the words is the thoughts that precede the words, the ideation that comes before the words. Most of us know that hopefully there's some thinking before there's speaking. And if you don't know that, then pretty much all of us know that anytime there wasn't thinking before speaking, we probably got into trouble, right? And so there's, even in God, there's this thinking that goes like this. Before he ever spoke a word, he had dreamed a dream. Before there was light, he dreamed about light. And before there were people, God dreamed it. And before there were planets, God dreamed it. And before there was a universe, God dreamed it. And before there were happenings, God was dreaming them. And I guess all I'm trying to say is that God's the biggest dreamer in the universe. And the reason I think this is so important is because it's one of the ways that we express the image of God in our lives. Have you ever thought about what it means to be made in God's image? I mean, if you think about it, one of the things we have to sort of wake up to is the fact that I'm not eternal and I'm not all-powerful. And if you're anything like me, you'd probably have to confess that you're not either, right? Like, we're just not eternal, all-powerful people. We're not omnipresent. We're not any of those omni things. And so at the same time, we're not those things. At the very same time, the Bible says that we were made in his image. And I think that's loaded language. I think it means a lot of things. But one of the things I think it means is that you and I were given creative capacity to dream a thing or to consider a future. And so I think part of our God image is, consciousness. But more specifically, I think it's the ability to dream. So you have permission. You are made to dream. It's part of who you are. It's part of who you are, and it's certainly part of what you did when you were a kid. I'd almost bet you. All right. So what do? Well, we just wake up to the fact that God is a dreamer. Secondly, we give ourselves some space. You got to give yourself some space. This is a theme even in this podcast, right? Space could be time, like a moment. Some of us are not dreaming because we haven't taken time to dream, The margins of our life are so closed off. Giving ourselves space could also be actual space. Like maybe you need a little dreaming getaway. Often my best dreaming moments come when I alter the spaces of my life. Another little story here. I live in Kentucky. I live in a little town here called Campbellsville. And about 40 minutes away, there is a monastery. It's called Gethsemane. It's where Thomas Merton lived for many years and wrote. And you can take silent retreats over there. And I've tried to make it a part of my yearly rhythm to go over and spend a 5-day section of time with those brothers, just being there, because it's a silent place, no one talks, and it's a different place, and it's not home. And there's something about a different space. There's also something about the silence that creates margin and creates room for me to think and reconsider my life. So maybe you need to give yourself some space. Number 3, give yourself permission to let the dream be small, you know? It doesn't have to be major. You don't have to dream and then have your dream validated by a dream council. You don't have to end world hunger. You could be really small. Maybe it's just starting a blog, or maybe it's learning how to cook, or maybe it's any number of things, you know? It could be big, but it could also be small. And sometimes we're just so intimidated by the big thing that we never give ourselves permission to do the small things that are in our heart. Here's the thing. It's not about whether or not the dream is big or whether or not the dream is small. It's about living out of our true self. Like, it's about living out of our own flourishing soul. That's what it means to dream. Okay. And then the 4th thing, what can we do? Get around dreamers and free people. Get around some people who have actually dreamed a dream. Get around people whose minds and hearts are not squished with just their everyday routine or overcome with cynicism. You know, this is really huge. Free people, that's what they do. Dreamers make space for new dreams. And sometimes we need to be around people who do this sort of thing. Some of us have a bunch of really disappointed, cynical friends. And let me just tell you, you should keep on loving your cynical and disappointed friends. But let me also tell you this, that's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to go anywhere. There is so much gravity around disappointment and cynicism, especially if we have a whole community of disappointment and cynicism. It's really hard to break out of it. And you need to find some people who are free and who have a dream. So find a free dreamer and, take them out to lunch, buy them coffee, spend some time with them. Soak up their freedom, I guess you could say. I'll tell you another story. My first 2 bosses were insane dreamers. They were always thinking of the next things. I worked at 2 landscape companies. One when I was 14 until I was like 20. And then another for about a year when I was 23 or so, something like that, right before we'd had River, my firstborn son. And one of the things that I've only become awake to and aware of in the last few years is that both of my first 2 bosses were amazing dreamers. They were always thinking about the next thing. And here's what's also awesome about these guys. They were not like super strategic people, you know? It wasn't just that they were these really purposeful living people who had perfect day planners and were always on schedule. You know, they weren't really Enneagram 1s, if I could say it that way. They were so much more free. They were thinking of possibilities. They had huge dreams. They had little dreams. They had medium dreams. But there was just this atmosphere of freedom around them. And I realized that in my own life, I got really formed and really shaped by the freedom that they lived in. They allowed themselves to lean into an unseen future. And I think it rubbed off on me. Okay, this week, what are you going to do? Here's what I think you should do. I think you need to consider your life. Consider your life. Oh, let me tell you one more thing about Gethsemane, that place I go to maybe once a year and hang out with the Catholic brothers. When you go to stay there, there's a tiny little desk in the room and it has a card on it. And the card says, consider your life. That's really great advice. So what are you going to do this week? Hey, why not get a little space and consider your life? Here's what I mean by consider your life. Consider the one that's inside you, but hasn't been realized yet. You know, not just the life you have. You should totally consider that as well. But you should give yourself permission to muse upon the thing that's inside you, but hasn't been realized yet. You know, what your life is now doesn't have to be what your life is in 5 years. you should pray. You should ask God for help. He's the ultimate dreamer. He dreamed of you before you ever got here. And he can help you have a dream as well. You know, you can set your face to the future as though there's goodness there. That'd be a good thing to do this week. Set yourself facing the future, knowing that there's goodness there. Because the truth is, there is goodness there. Okay, this week, get a little space, pray a little bit, consider the future, consider your life, and lean into the thing that you know is already inside you. All right, peace.
Hey everybody, this is Casey Corum, the producer of the Ferment podcast. Thanks for listening. I got a couple quick things for you. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. We've got a bunch of exciting shows coming up and we don't want you to miss a thing. So on social media, you can find us on Instagram at the Ferment podcast, and on Twitter, you can find us at FermentCast. Please let us know what you think of the podcast by leaving a review on iTunes. All right, see you next time. Peace.